was a huge scope. Breath of the Wild's Hyrule is the most fully
Ezreal time.
realized Hyrule in the franchise. It takes what I loved about Twilight Princess's authentic world building and adds to it with a larger scope. Sometimes I just stop moving and take in the world, looking around at various landmarks, telling myself, wow, I wonder what's hidden over there. It gives me the same magical feeling as when I was a kid, exploring the Great Sea. When I was younger, I obviously wasn't into game design analysis, so I didn't ask myself a lot of questions. I just sailed around to figure out what was in the world, and I couldn't have been happier. Breath of the Wild manages to recapture that feeling in a way no other Zelda game has managed in a very long time. I mean, I stumbled across the Master Sword on a whim. I was just exploring the northern portion of Hyrule and found the Lost Woods. It was a bit of a time to find my way through it, but once I got through the puzzle, I found the Master Sword just lying there, waiting for me to take it. But I couldn't take it then, because I needed a specific amount of permanent hearts. I would keep coming back here, shrine after shrine after shrine, to see if I could draw the Master Sword from its pedestal, until finally at 13 hearts, I managed it, and I was so excited.
Your maximum refund for just $25? Now that's what we call a win. No hidden fees, no gimmicks, no surprises. File your taxes for one amazing flat rate with 1040.com.
I should have ordered it.
It doesn't break, only loses energy and needs to recharge every once in a while. It does 30 base damage and 60 to Guardians, which completely destroys them. It's a super satisfying reward, maybe even worth forsaking some stamina upgrades to receive. Side note, you can increase your stamina, which is an idea I had in Skyward Sword, and I'm super glad they followed through with it. I honestly would have preferred you start Breath of the Wild with 2 stamina wheels and have the max be 4 stamina wheels, but hey, 1 stamina wheel isn't horrible and you can climb most objects with that amount. I just think for the sake of being able to sprint around everywhere for a long period of time, 2 stamina wheels would have been a better default than... I really love the Master Sword because it's a permanent weapon that completely destroys the once terrifying Guardians. And if you attempt to throw it at full health, it shoots out a beam, like in the classic games. You can similarly find the Hylian shield hidden away in Hyrule Castle. It's a nearly unbreakable shield, and it's so much more satisfying to find because it's hidden away instead of lying in a shop somewhere. There are also very unique shrine quests, like one in the northwest portion of Hyrule. You're told by a Rito child that her grandfather saw a bird when he climbed a tree off in the distance. When you climb
Zach was too low to get back in there, that was my bad.
The different hilltops form the shape of a bird you can glide toward. This is a neat perspective trick. Similarly, there are a few puzzles involving getting specific balls into the correct sockets. There's an area in the middle.
I wanted my harvest stack, but it didn't go off for some reason.
Raining, and you need to get 4 colored balls into the right holes. The easiest way to do this is by using stasis to hit the balls onto the platform. It's not as easy as it looks, especially because rain makes it harder to climb obstacles, so Rivali's Gale is a very helpful tool here. I actually waited until I had Rivali's Gale until I came back to complete this shrine quest. The environmental shrine quests are so satisfying to seek out and solve, and if they didn't exist, I'd think much less of the shrine system in general. This, of course, doesn't mean everything you end up finding is going to be worth it.
Q went through the menu. Kind of a cool visual bug.
I don't necessarily mind the simple puzzles as much, but there's that third type of shrine I mentioned much earlier in the video that irritates me to no end. The test of strength trials. If I had to guess, there are probably close to 20 of these damn things, and they're all close to identical.
Yeah, I did that with 127 MS.
A different set of weapons each time with the exact same moveset. Sometimes you won't have stone pillars, and instead you'll have water for Cryonis pillars, or metal pillars you can use Magnesis to drudge up. You can do a spin charge, which you can stop by having him run into a pillar. You can
down him pretty low, but his turret's up on me, so...
use your paraglider, and then he has a desperation attack where he charges up a huge laser.
Is he backing already?
My first encounter with one of these was extremely unpleasant. I was low on weapons, and in the middle of the fight, all of them broke, and I was out of arrows. This highlights a major issue with the durability system, a system which on its own is a decent idea. Since there are so many different weapons that you're allowed to find at any point, implementing a durability system would make it so that you won't have an infinite supply of 70 strength weapons to flaunt around in easier areas like Zora's Domain. I understand why the system needs to exist, but I have to say it's a bit too harsh. Weapons of all types break far too quickly. Lower level weapons breaking with only about 20 swings, and higher level weapons breaking in about 40 to 50 swings depending. You also don't have any way of tracking how
If it wasn't for lag, I could hit him.
Though it definitely
TBH.
forces you to use a variety of weapons and helps
Evolution
keep
slow
enemies
too strong.
overpowered, it can put you in a situation like this one in the test of strength trial, where without a base weapon, you end up useless, resorting to bombs. Bombs, however, are not a good stand-in for a default unbreakable weapon. They do as little damage as possible, meaning you'll have to throw a metric fuckton to chip away the enemy health bar to any meaningful percentage. This is where I was at in the fight, running around the mini guardian as he charged his laser, dropping bombs whenever I could, and I did this for almost 10 minutes. It was mind-numbing. It's hard to think of a perfect solution to this durability issue because it both creates and fixes potential problems. The real issue for me, though, is that there are several points in the game where you could be defenseless, and bombs are incredibly impractical combat tools. It would be better to give Link a weak, unbreakable
he's going
sword,
bot.
shield, and bow that upgrade over time, but can never reach the same heights as some of the stronger weaponry. Let's say they can only reach 40 or 50 strength after an extensive amount of work. This would
I'm
fix
so
the
lucky that I
problem
picked
of
Ezreal this game. If I
weapons,
picked any other
while
champion, the lag would be killing me.
stronger, more varied weaponry. Of course, it's hard to reach that same level of diversity when the game isn't forcing you to use it, but the power imbalance should be enough of an incentive. With this system in place, weapon
I don't know
durability
if
could
this
save
minion
you
can survive the shot.
After 60
Nice.
or so swings, lower level weapons should break, and after maybe 100 or so swings, higher level weapons should break. As a result of this, just spawn less weapons for the player to use. This way the player can still stockpile weapons, but at a slower rate. If we could also see a durability meter for our weapons, it would be a near perfect system. Even then, an idea is just an idea. I don't know how well it would work unless I design it and have it play tested. I can only speak to
Wow, my guy just got
frustrations of
chunked so
finding a
hard.
really cool weapon and having it
Holy
break
shit.
seconds later. It isn't a perfect system, though I'm glad it exists
He
in
says
some
cool.
form or another, or I wouldn't have
I want
been
the
doing this
CS.
experiment. Instead of just using one sword, Link can use a near limitless arsenal of weaponry. Everything from swords to halberds to spears to longswords to great swords to battle axes to magic rods to bows with specialty arrows ranging from fire, ice, shock, bomb, and ancient arrows to damage guardians. The combat system is similar to Twilight Princess.
I don't think they
but
can
adopts
feed
the
Lucian
pretty
that much
familiar
harder than they are.
sword. If you shield bash with the correct timing,
winning in
you can
CS
stagger
kills.
your opponent. This time, however, the window is much less.
But I don't think Zach
which
will
means
go
timing
back
is
and
a
do that
big
again.
priority.
If I'm
Additionally,
lucky
since
anyways.
The durability system is much harsher. Shields have a chance to break if you use them too recklessly.
I mean, literally all I had there was
This
Dorans
is
and boots, and he tried to
sword.
engage
Not only that,
like a
you have
50
dodge
minion
button,
wave.
and if you dodge at just the right time, you can follow up with
So
a flurry
rough.
of attacks in slow motion. Each weapon attacks in a different way.
Let's see what Zach's
similar
up
to
to.
action-focused fighters like Devil May Cry and Bayonetta, but not nearly as complex. Short swords let you do a standard spin attack. Great swords let Link spin around in a circle, allowing movement during an elongated spin attack, albeit much slower than a normal spin attack. Spears let you attack from a distance, and the charge attack lets you rapidly stab at your opponent from afar.
Yeah,
You
that
also have
Ignite
access
came
to
out and did a
plummet
lot.
attack while you're in the air, as well as
I think I
access
even
to
managed to
bow
snag a
let
kill
you
there.
shock or burn your opponent. You can even throw weapons to
I
cause
don't want to
damage.
lose minions,
cost
but I
of
guess
the
I'll help
weapon
out,
like break,
because no one else
or you
is
can paraglide over
sitting a
an
million
enemy
years
and drop a
back.
bomb on them. Or you can stay
Lucian's
facing
gonna
the
come in and try to
stop
ult one of us.
tracks. Or you can hit an explosive barrel
Oh,
to
we
clear
got
out a
lucky.
skull cave. Or you can hit
And I got the
head
drag
with
kill
arrow
somehow.
for critical damage. Or you can pick up a metal object with magnesis and hit them with it repeatedly. Or you can throw a metal boomerang during a thunderstorm and
Come on.
have the lightning hit the boomerang.
What a god.
of enemies. Yeah, there are a lot
Another
of
slick engage by Zach.
to you. Gone are the days
I should have just gone
of
around, but
spin
I don't know.
You have so much freedom to approach a battle in any which way you'd prefer. Maybe if you're fighting a tough enemy, you'll try to stay back and fire arrows, or you might be better at dodging, so you'll stick close to the enemy. This is unprecedented in Zelda. Not even Twilight Princess came this close.
Oh, they're
Skyward Sword
engaging.
had an engaging combat system, but that was mostly because the motion controls were more complex than a button press, and turning combat into a series of mini puzzles was beneficial to that goal.
Yeah, I don't know why
Breath of the Wild
Nautilus
takes
tried
traditional
hooking.
Zelda combat and improves it. Enemy AI
They say
is
4 bot after I
surprisingly
pinged XD.
Bokoblins attack predictably based on which weapons they're using, similar to how Link uses his weapons. Moblins attack with much bigger weapons, so there are wider swings with more devastating blows. Lizalfos are very agile, jumping around at a lightning-quick pace. Often if you attempt
Swords
to
anyway.
shoot them with an arrow, they'll start pacing back and forth to avoid it.
Alright, how
Lynels
much
pack a
items do
punch
you
of a
got?
Moblin, the
You have a
health
whole
bar of a
pork.
boss, and the agility of a Lizalfos,
Nice.
all with an increased set of moves to back that up. They are terrifying to say
I missed the
least.
queue
They
somehow.
can shoot shock arrows at you, they have a fire
There we
AoE
go.
attack, they can charge straight at you. It's really hard to get a grip on what a line
I really need some sort of
Then there are the
staying
Guardians,
power,
which are
like
equally
a refillable pod or
My first
something.
encounter with a Guardian didn't go well. They can spot you
But I
from
mean,
what
I'm getting
seems like
ganked a shit
mile
ton too.
away as they charge up their laser
These-
and crawl to you with their spider
minions are,
legs,
like,
and this
wandering into
very
other minions.
off-putting music starts to play. Early game, these things are a fucking
That's ally.
nightmare because if they hit you
At
with
least
their
I think.
lasers
XD.
even once, they'll easily take away your middling 3 hearts. Coming back late game to challenge them is no small feat.
Oh my gosh, the
Learn
auto
to
didn't kill.
carry their lasers back at them, but
And the
fucking
lag
up
was
the
so long
timing
that I
is
couldn't have,
fatal. You can try hitting them in the eye with an arrow
I'll
to stun
plan
them
that.
periodically,
Please
but their
stop
movements become
lagging so
increasingly
hard.
harder to track, and if you take too long to hit them, you'll be hit with a laser. which will
Literally, all I have to do is queue at the
the
minions.
difficulty is just another reason this game is such a breath of fresh air. It frequently uses multiple enemies, but rarely do I feel it's implemented poorly. You're equipped with a variety of AoE attacks to deal with multiple enemies effectively, especially after conquering the Divine Beast Von Naboris. Though the combat is
My fucking ping didn't come out
thanks
because
to
of
the
lag,
variety of
which is
options, the
impressive.
difficulty balancing is
I didn't even know that was a thing.
polished. I don't much mind wandering into an area where everyone kicks your ass. In fact, I kinda like that. Exploring Hyrule Castle in the early game is terrifying because everything can one-shot you, but that's why it's so satisfying to explore early on. If the game was constantly scaled to your level, it would ruin the suspense. I have more of a problem with areas that don't scale up to you in difficulty. For example, I did Zora's Domain last, and because I had explored the world pretty thoroughly at that point, I had a large quantity of powerful weapons and armor, not to mention I had a shit ton of hearts from all the shrines that I had completed. To see each of the enemies with such a small amount of HP doing almost no damage to me was fairly disheartening. There's a Lionel you need to sneak around to grab shock arrows for the fight against the Divine Beast Valuta. He's clearly designed to be a tough challenge early game, so you won't easily take him on, even though the option is always available for you to fight him if you're feeling ballsy.
Dang it.
Having come back with
Why
a
would he
huge
stand off
arsenal,
that?
I beat the Lionel in no time flat because he's one of the easiest Lionel types in the game. It sucks the tension right out of an encounter, and it's a bit hard to stay engaged when I stumble across an easier area. The game attempts to counteract this by placing spotted enemies that are clearly more powerful. and
Just
they
gonna
don't
ult me
start
out of
doing
nowhere
anything
and
neat, so-
I flash away as soon as I can. That doesn't do
so
anything.
that's a step in the right direction. But there comes a point where you can outclass most enemies by upgrading your equipment at the Great Ferry.
Dude,
I'm glad
I'm
the material
backing.
and upgrade system is back in some fashion.
I'm backing,
because
I'm
it
down.
incentivizes even more exploration to look for materials, bugs, food. The cooking system serves that same goal to give you food to restore hearts, stamina, give you temporary heart and stamina upgrades, increase your stealthiness, give you a defense or offense boost. There are so many things you can conjure up in a cooking pot. You also need to experiment yourself, since you aren't given a cookbook or anything to follow. The Great Fairy can use your materials to upgrade your armor to a ludicrous degree, and if you pair that with a defense boost potion, you'll likely never find another difficult encounter again. They slightly balance this by only allowing specific buffs to be applied one at a time. You can't have both a defense boost and an offense boost active at the same time, for example. You're forced to choose, which does help balance the system a bit. What doesn't help is the ability to eat food in the middle of combat at any point with no consequence. If you're running low on hearts, you can pause the game, whip out a food you have cooked up, and instantly recover hearts. It baffles me there's no consequence in place to stop this from happening, because it encourages reckless play more than ever. There's not even a limit as to how many fairies you can hold at any time.
What the fuck? I don't know what Zach was doing there. That was so weird.
Metric fuck ton of fairies to ensure that you never see a game over screen. This incentivizes.
Oh, now they're gonna flame me because they're all losing.
Because even if you take damage, you'll either get revived or you have enough food to recover hearts in the middle of combat. As you would imagine, this negatively affects the difficulty balance overall. Yeah, you can opt out.
They're so afraid. They're not gonna take your rocks instead of turret.
But again,
That's
I'd
just
like
stupid.
to discuss the concept of an optimal strategy. If there's something you can do to make the game easier with no cost to the player, you bet the player is going to utilize that opportunity. There are simply too many
Yeah,
options.
I hit the ring, but he can't.
I'm curious to see
use it.
how hard mode will affect this
I think only Ezreal can use the ring.
I'm already a bit miffed at the amiibo
Which is kind of
system in this
annoying.
game because it's in almost
Can you imagine
every
Ezreal
single
support
Twilight
with
Princess HD. There's
ADCs
several
being able to
cosmetic rewards,
use the
like
ring?
Big Goron sword, or the
That would be
Hero
really
Time
cool,
Tunic,
but
or a bunch of
Brian's
other
lazy.
cool references to past Zelda games you can get from the amiibo. That much is harmless.
just
and even
farming.
if you get a powerful weapon, you can only use them once a day, and the weapons break quickly anyway, so it doesn't
Whatever.
feel like
They're
you're
gonna ping him
cheating.
and stuff.
Yet there are two amiibo that give you
Got my ult back.
think
I'll get sword trees.
And Epona. If you scan the Smash Brothers,
Oh, they're all
Link
pretty
amiibo,
fed.
you get Epona, who is
Maybe
the
Ninja's
best
happy.
possible horse you can obtain. It's cool that Epona is in the game in some fashion, but this really should have been a secret somewhere. It doesn't necessarily negatively impact the game because you can get Epona level horses in the wild, but not being able to get Epona on your own is incredibly disheartening. The more disheartening inclusion is that of Wolflink, which you can use as a companion in fights. In the base game, you aren't even allowed to tame regular animals to have them fight for you. This is a mechanic you can only experience if you have Wolflink, which is fine for people that own the amiibo now, but it's going to have a negative impact on the game years down the line when Wolflink becomes rare or unobtainable. He's a cool reward, but this is a system that should have been in place already so that people don't feel cheated out of a mechanic because they didn't buy one of Nintendo's overpriced pieces of plastic. Whether or not hard mode can fix the difficulty balancing issues, I don't know. However, I do enjoy the visual progression of
Lane phase has been
a
over for
warrior
like 10
and a
minutes.
fully equipped warrior. There are so many different armor sets you can equip for different situations, so many weapons, shields, and bows for Link to carry on his back, and he never looks the same because of that. It's a far cry from the traditional
Now they are.
tunic, and
Sure.
I love it. Additionally, you look like
It's
a
only now that
goddamn
he's been fed.
badass later in the game with a cool armor set and a shit ton of cool-looking elemental weapons. Even using the Master Sword and Hylian Shield look as cool as ever.
Yeah, now he's beating me in
Constantly
CS
have to clear
because
them. It probably
he's
has
been
the
allowed to
best
stay
character
mid.
progression of any Zelda game because of that
My team
visual
just died in
variety,
weird
as well as
spots
how
now.
much it increases your offensive capabilities. Having such a wide array of options during combat, from your giant flame sword to your electric arrows to your ice spear, there are so many options it's ludicrous. This is such a big improvement on the idea of dungeon items, which basically no longer exist. Instead, you have a variety of realistic logic puzzles in almost every scenario. You can use Cryonis to get across water where you'd otherwise drown from a lack of stamina. You can freeze an
Jinx
enemy
died
with
really
Blade
far away
Siege
from the
off a
turret.
cliff. You can shoot an electric arrow at the water to cause a giant shockwave, hitting every enemy in the radius. Electricity and ice both stun the enemy, fire can burn the enemy, or burn the ground for an updraft you can use to fly into the air on your paraglider and shoot an enemy in midair or plummet into the ground. Fire can also keep you warm in the cold, or burn thorns and foliage. There's so much you can do with fire, and so many ways to produce fire. You can stun an enemy with it or hit.
The weird thing about it is lag is bad on him because
toward you. Even Cryonis
you can't hit your skill
probably
shots,
has a much
but
less
it's
obvious
good because
use
he's
case.
one of those
You can
characters that
use
can
it
just
to cross
spam
water or drudge up chests floating above the water, and the game even uses it in a few boss
spam
fights
Q on the
to
minions from
ice
really far away.
The bosses suffer the most from the difficulty issues, much more than the regular fights. Boss fights in Hyrule Field
Really
vary
have to
in
care
difficulty.
too much about
Those bosses
them
suffer
now.
the most from the difficulty issues, unfortunately, much more than regular fights. Stone Talus are almost never a challenge. You can just climb up their back and hit their ore vein enough to kill them. Hinox are a bit more difficult because you need to.
Now they're mad at Vayne instead of me. I don't know if that's good or not.
Of the Hinox. Sometimes they protect their legs.
Can I get this before Jinx respawns?
Hits,
Yeah.
the Hinox will cover their eye with prevent you from stun locking them. They pack a pretty fierce punch, but once you've beaten the 5th High Nox, it becomes pretty easy to predict their attacks and dodge accordingly. Molduga is a much larger threat, and it's a lot harder to fight. You have to lure it out of the sand so you can shoot it with an arrow or
I wonder how fast they can take down Drag.
Vibration, and you can detonate the bomb after Molduga eats it. This is a near impossible task on your own, so you'll need a sand seal to outrun Molduga before it emerges out from under you and damages you. If you can time your arrows to hit the fast-moving Molduga, eventually you'll stun it so you can hit it with your normal weapons if you don't want to use your bombs.
Don't worry, Jinx, I got that.
Reminds me of Puppet Ganon from the Wind Waker because you have to time your arrow shots in much the same way, just added to the fast movement of the sand seal. Unfortunately, there are far more fights against the Stone Talus and High Nox, which get stale after repeated fights. I would have loved to see even more fights against Molduga, but they only exist in the desert.
I think my Q hit
Additional
deletion.
boss fights are located in each of the 4, technically 5.
On Zach, get the thing.
Each
Where they
boss
get
has
it.
a variation on Calamity Ganon, and
Stop making me tank for you, babe.
complex, save for a few. Let's take Wing Blade Ganon for the sake of example. He attacks with tornadoes and his laser cannon. You have to use the gusts
can't
of wind to
kill
paraglide
Jake like
around,
this.
trying to hit him in the air with his bow. The problem is that his
There we go.
attacks
Fade
are so
out.
easy to avoid. He has such a long windup for his tornado attack, and the tornado moves so slowly you'll likely be out of the way and flat. His laser cannon is a bit threatening, but because of the gusts of wind, the lasers will have a much harder time hitting you. They don't home in on you once shot, so if you're moving quickly enough, you can easily avoid them. Plus, if you're versed in the parry system...
If I was a tank, this lag wouldn't matter. I could just be like Garen Q on the
Additionally,
EDC.
if you shoot his eye with a few arrows, you can stun him, trivializing the fight even further. It's simply far too easy, and I really feel that's true for both Fireblight and Waterblight Ganon. Each one is a bit more unique, using bombs and cryonis respectively, but they're far too
I like it how my E
easy
just
to
went fucking nowhere
Fireblight
somehow.
Ganon just throws his huge sword,
They all juke
occasionally
him.
spitting
I can
embers.
shoot a banana.
Though those embers fly at such a slow pace, they're barely a threat. But when he's that easily stunned because of it, it becomes more of a novelty than a challenge that cheapens over the course of the battle. Waterblight Ganon has a similar problem. As long as you can keep hitting him with arrows and downing him, he'll never get the chance to attack you with his giant, slow-moving spear. Sometimes you'll have to use cryonis to break
You
his
got
ice
2
wall.
kills, Zach.
That's
Just,
about it. His
be
second
glad
phase turns the
we're-
arena into water.
I don't know.
making
I don't know, I'm
cryonis
dying in
into
jungle again.
but there's really nothing stopping you from swimming instead. It feels like the same fight. Just because the arena changes midway doesn't make the fight dynamic. Thunderblight Ganon is one of the only difficult boss battles, and it's why I love him. He's much quicker and attacks you directly most of the time. He'll warp up to you and swing his sword, prompting you to dodge or parry him with a stun. He deals a lot of damage and gets more of a chance to damage you because of his speed, especially in his second phase when his sword is electrified and can stun
tank
you
is
with a
dying.
hit. I got several game overs in this fight, and it makes cool use of metal conducting electricity. You have to pull a peg out from the ground and up to him so you can
Oh, my
use
Q
the
didn't go up.
electricity against him and stun him. What I like so much about the fight is that you have to think on your feet and use caution.
Aw, he already
He's
regened all his
perfectly
health.
capable of completely wrecking your shit if you screw up. This is also why I like Calamity Ganon's first phase.
Why are
It
people
combines
staying?
every aspect of the Ganon boss fights into one
Whatever.
terrifying beast. He has the giant flame sword, several weapons near his head, the ability to crawl around like a guardian, to fly around the room, even to shoot lasers. This fight is all about parrying or dodging at the correct times, and can quickly turn sour if you aren't well versed in the combat. His attacks are extremely devastating, so
The wave.
avoiding them is practically required. It forces you to time your parries and dodges, and shoot Calamity Ganon down from his flight using arrows. You're even forced to use the
That was a really
parry on
good
the
cue by
laser
me.
beams in the desperation phase, where he flames up his body like Fireblight Ganon. It's a fantastic culmination of a brilliant combat system, testing you on everything you've learned over the course of the game. Beast Ganon...
They're still at Baron? What?
That's another
What are you guys
Beast
doing?
Ganon is quite possibly the worst 3D Zelda final boss.
I think everyone else is lagging.
I mean that wholeheartedly. Zelda gives you a bow that shoots light arrows, and you ride
It's so
the
fucking
horse
hot in my
around
room
and shoot
sometimes.
weak spots. It makes good use of your bow,
hate it.
especially when you jump off your horse and use slow motion or hit the wall individually. But once you realize that's the extent of the fight,
I'm half tempted to
well,
just AFK
it's
and
just such a
turn down the
difficult
thermostat so
route.
I'm not on
Beast
fire.
Ganon cannot hit you because his frontward attack is so slow.
not fast
His
enough to
turning
get me.
radius is laughable. If you just ride around his sides and back, he'll never get a chance to hit you. I fought this boss 3 times, and not once have I ever come close to being hit by it. The real problem with this fight is that it only tests one of Link's abilities as opposed to his several other abilities that went unchecked in the previous phase. Using your bow to hit shiny targets is a surface level application. It should have made use of his climbing to maybe climb up Beast Ganon, Shadow of the Colossus style, to give Ganon more attacks to use when you're in his blind set. Think of the boss fight with the blue serpent Nade. You have to clear the malice from its body by using the paraglider to catch its updrafts, and then use a slow motion bow to hit the eyes and several parts of its body. The problem is that because Nadra moves so fast, and Nadra is flying around in the air, it's much harder to paraglide into a correct position to hit an eye, especially because that eye could be on any angle of the serpent. This isn't a masterclass,
cooldown now.
but it tests both your paragliding and bow using skills. It would have been even cooler if you could mount Nadra, but that's neither here nor there. As it stands, Nadra is a better final boss than Beast Ganon, which is very, very disappointing. It just baffles me because
I mean, we literally all got dives, so I don't know why they're so
it's all over it. It doesn't feel as
salty about it. If you get dived as 5 and die, you just the game's just
The
over.
problem is that no matter how epic the scenery,
If you're ever in that situation.
design of Calamity Ganon, the fight is
Yeah, the
so
game's over.
boring that it all crumbles. It's so simple.
I'll let you guys see what's
Any
going on at
meaningful
base.
sense of challenge or accomplishment is immediately sucked out of the fight.
They don't
wanna
think
have to
it's
say
fair.
this, but usually the quality of the dungeons is linked to
Come
the
on.
quality of the boss fights.
Evolution
I really don't
down.
like Windblight Ganon, and I also happen to dislike
keep
Divine
walking that way a
Beast
bit.
Vomito.
Fucking hell.
It's one of the easiest dungeons I've ever played.
Whatever, I have Ian Flash.
The Divine Beasts, and initially
We
I
both
was
missed our
pumped to enter
things.
it. The moment I realized
Do I blind
that
chase?
this
Yes.
legend used to fight Ganondorf, I was instantly intrigued. That intrigue quickly wears away when each of the 4 dungeons begin to get repetitive. Go to an area, meet a few special people of that
Got 'em.
race that are descendants of the ancestor or some
That was
shit,
all
do some
skill.
stuff for them, and then attempt to mount the Divine Beast, which is always a different variation of hit him in the legs with the exception of Va Rudania. In Va Mado, you fight the Divine Beast exterior by paragliding around the Divine Beast and using the slow motion bow firing to hit
Oh,
all
okay,
its
cool.
weak spots with bomb arrows. The problem here is that Va Mado
Oh, I should
isn't really
probably
fun
go to
fight.
Baron,
It
but I
just
think
has
this will
laser
just kill our
which, as
base.
I mentioned before, are so easily
Right.
dodgeable in midair, it's almost a joke. It's a cool
I
concept.
don't know,
at
it's
first
not like I
glance,
do that much damage, they
but I
can
was
just
impressed
get it
with
without
how
me.
the
They
universe
really need
and then
it.
traveled to Zora's domain first. Fighting Va Ruta was so cool. The epic music in the background, riding on Sidon's back, deflecting the ice blocks being thrown at me, swimming up waterfalls to shoot the 4 weak spots on Ruta. Going to Va Naboris, the same thing happens on a sand
I had to eat it to
Va
keep my
Rudania
passive
is the
up.
only unique one in this regard, because you have to sneak past the flying guardians
I have a lot of
and
buffs.
shoot Unobo out of a cannon to damage the Divine Beast. It's fun to sneak your way past the flying guardians and get Unobo a few, and it's a nice pattern break from the other 3 Divine Beasts. In terms of actual dungeon quality, though, I have to say I'm disappointed. Though I initially found the concept of exploring the inner workings of a giant beast to be very novel, that novelty wears off pretty fast. They might all be shaped differently with a different central mechanic, but the theming is a red version of the shrine layouts. This theme is already pretty old in the shrines themselves, so I wasn't impressed to see it.
Oh my gosh, are we actually gonna win this? This game's so stupid. We don't deserve a win.
In each dungeon, you move a segment of
Alright, let's go get Baron.
screen. In this case, you move Varuta's trunk to douse water on certain segments of the dungeon.
Despite having a nod, I'm the anchor that's holding us down.
But I noticed it lacked a
Fucking Vayne backed? Are you serious? She's like 90% of our damage.
None of the puzzles were ever that difficult to solve.
Fuck it, I'll just pressing Q. Hopefully lag will let most of them through.
So I had no idea how to move the water wheel.
Alright, now I'm actually disconnecting. Fantastic.
And it goes by in about 15 minutes if you know what you're doing, which is a far cry from traditional dungeon design. But
Yo, ice
I had
skates.
3 more
Let's go.
dungeons waiting for me, so I persisted. I then moved to Valado, which, as I already alluded to, didn't impress me all that much. I thought turning the beast to different angles was cool at first, but the puzzles are just too
Give me a stack.
For instance, you move
No.
a ball around
Got me
by
a weight
touching the
though.
divine beast, and all it requires is you opening the map, changing a
We
few
need
options,
Vayne
and
to not
voila.
get Vayne spotted.
I love the option to complete any section of the dungeon in any order, but since none of them are complex, it makes for an incredibly boring dungeon. There's a
Yeah,
puzzle where you have to get a
please.
ball to hit a switch hard enough by
It's Finn.
The problem is that you can just use stasis on the ball, hit it a few times, and the switch is immediately pressed without you ever having to worry. Then you use the tilt on movable.
It stresses me the fuck out when I see ADC splitting.
Right? This got me really bummed out, especially because I completed the dungeon again in about 15 minutes. Vanda Boris was my next dungeon.
I knew one of those was gonna die, but my Q would.
This was the first time I was
Whichever one died first, my Q would get the other one. Because of how I positioned it.
There were several rotation options for each of the 3 notches.
Bot wave's kinda scary, but it should be
If
coming
you
up
lined
soon,
all
I
3
think.
up correctly, it would activate one segment near the top where you need to run a current of electricity.
I'm pretty backed off. My ult's almost up too.
After you reach a wall, because it causes that segment of the dungeon to raise, and you need to get behind that wall so you
Come
can
on, Kaisa, ult in.
This is the first hint of a divine
Be like a Lee Sin with a Q.
mechanic so far removed.
Oh, nice, I can one-shot the tiny ones.
Beyond the surface level applications, and it sparks more thought into how
I have enough for a larger rod.
That said, the dungeon still doesn't link the central mechanic into all of its puzzle solving, only the central puzzles. The top segment of the dungeon
That
is
should
compelling
hit.
in its own right, but it has nothing to do with the
Hoggies woggies.
moving 2 metal balls to the
Cheek
middle
it, break it.
dungeon to activate 2 electric
Oh
switches.
fuck, who do I even focus here? I wanna focus down like
And I
graves.
feel the same way about another puzzle near the rear of the dungeon, which involves lining up 2 wheels to activate switches.
Alright, that was a good use of Ignite.
And raise a segment of the dungeon.
Alright, can we end yet?
Pretty far
Ah,
away
fuck
from
no.
the central mechanic, and because of that, it's hard for the dungeon to feel
Yeah, I
like
can't get
it
any
warrants
of
being
those.
a dungeon
I don't want it
instead
back.
of a collection of shrine puzzles that rarely interact with one another. The major
Ah,
issue
Zach
is
figured out how to
that
take turret.
puzzles
Let's go.
aren't tied to the central mechanic, and if they are, in the case of Vamado, those puzzles are too surface level for them to feel satisfying.
If turret
So,
attacks
the
me,
freedom to
I'm
select
dead
any of the puzzles
because
in any
of
order
lag.
you please does increase the replayability of the dungeons quite significantly.
Don't
But if none of the
feed
puzzles
the
are satisfying
reaper,
and complete
baby,
in the first
take
place,
my
why bother? By Varudanya,
I'm
the
back.
game was still telling me how to complete the dungeon. Daruk lets me know that I need to get a map of the dungeon first, and then activate 4 or 5 Sheikah pedestals hidden behind a few puzzles. I do not need this spelled out to me every time I visit a dungeon. It's maddening. I know they can't account for you to visit any one dungeon first, but that's no excuse for the game constantly explaining how the dungeon works when it's the same across every dungeon. This is especially appalling because a skip button exists for cutscenes and other tutorials in the game itself, so I don't understand why you can't skip this beginning segment of the dungeon. Varudania itself isn't nearly as impressive as Von Boris. The beginning was interesting because I hadn't dealt with pitch black before and truly felt lost until I found the map. This is when the dungeon lights up and you can move it 90 degrees to the right and then back to its resting position. It's initially cool to turn the beast over and watch the dungeon.
Oh, I want that one.
But this is never more complex than get ball into track, turn the dungeon back around for the ball to fall down this other segment of the track, then lift up this metal doorway, and then
Just need to wait for Not to
There's
engage.
one puzzle that literally just involves
Or Zach, although Zach's in base.
What does
And
this
Jinx
puzzle
is
test?
over there for some
I
reason.
really don't get it. I had a cool moment where the dungeon taught me to light arrows by moving over a fire while the arrow was caught.
She's popping off.
I only knew
200
that
CS.
because of the robust logic system. That's really cool, but it has nothing to do with the rest of the
Look at that
dungeon.
build. She's
Once you
almost full
figure out
build
how to
too.
do it, the puzzle
Wonder how much
built
gold she
inside
has.
is a piece of cake. Just take a metal box, put it over the
I think she has all our team's
fire,
gold.
to the
10
side.
kills, 7 assists.
Imagine if you could move
10 assists, 4
Varudania
kills.
and
I don't really want the
forward.
kills though, because I know I suck.
Then you could add more puzzles that involve you having to switch between the directions.
If I can get a kill for someone else, that will be better than getting a kill for me.
Back 2 directions in the middle of the puzzle. You can add a bit of time-based movement to this. It's incredible.
Come on, get the Wolves Bane.
I was looking forward to the unique
Get the
idea
Wolves
of
Bane.
dungeons this time around. They mentioned the idea that the dungeons would be more about traversal and puzzle solving, which got me excited. Turns out they really just meant that it's about changing the dungeon itself and solving a bunch of simple, disconnected.
What I really want is for them to go in, and then I can ult the back line. If that happens, it'll be really good for me. I'm level 16, so my ult's strong.
Special. It's definitely not one of my favorite dungeons in the series because it's over too quickly and not all of its puzzles make effective use of that central mechanic. It's just the best of the 4 dungeons.
We're waiting on the Ornn ult coming.
The solution I
Because I don't think my team's gonna engage.
puzzle complexity is to reduce the number of shrines you can visit.
There we
increase
go.
the number of
Alright,
dungeons
where
you
to?
can find, and
I'll ult the
increase
Kaisa.
length of those dungeons. Would anyone really be complaining if they had 70 shrines instead of 120, each more on the side of environmental riddle shrines?
I'm still lagging.
puzzle shrines, and then save some of the puzzle solving
That was good.
for dungeons, which could be longer because they don't have so much time devoted to shrine puzzles, and could have a logical ramp up in complexity since they can keep you
Fuck,
off
I
the
looped.
dungeon. They should limit the number of individual puzzles you solve.
I focused the
Cassio.
Cassio.
The less of a chance there is for that puzzle to be complex because it can't work.
Alright, it's time for the 1v9 v ISP.
Previous Zelda dungeons. It doesn't have to be designed in a strictly linear fashion, and I think I prefer the non-linearity
Race is still decent.
dungeons. I just think the lack of
Oh, not that
depth
bad.
makes them completely ruin the dungeons. And really, would anyone complain if
We coulda come back, but didn't peel for anyone.
bare asses mostly?
And he just went in, and then all the tanks walked past.
Fascinating and
Just
quite humorous near the end. But
not
most of
good.
The other side quests are just meaningless fetch quests. It's kind
And
of
I don't know what Zach was doing that fight,
You can keep a few of the standouts, but honestly, some
but
quests
I don't know.
should-
The vein was decent. I'll honor the vein, I
I don't
guess.
understand why they're in different categories to begin with. I can even add to my solution by tweaking the dungeon.
Lagging Ezreal does almost more than Vayne.
Castle is a great example of a type of dungeon I wish. to
Wait,
see
we had-
more of. This place is focused.
we had a
less
Vayne
on
and a
puzzle
Jinx. Where
elements and
was-
more on actual dungeon crawling. There are high-level monsters everywhere.
Okay, not all this was the support.
Hidden bosses and items hidden every which way, and you can explore any segment.
Did
of
we
the
have a
dungeon
Jinx
you
top?
want at your own pace. This takes the impressive non-linearity of the dungeon design and
What?
places it in an environment where it takes advantage of the deeper combat system.
Wait, I'm
by finding
confused.
Some very tough challenges to overcome, and littering the castle. with
Yeah, we had
secret
two
areas
ADCs.
behind bookcases or breakable.
I don't know, I think if
What's ironic
this
about
was like a
dungeon
Tryndamere or
is
something, we
that
would have done
compared to
better.
Each of the dungeons in the franchise, it's the most similar to a
Or if this was a
dungeon
Tryndamere,
in the
it'd
traditional
be
sense of
fun.
an RPG, where you fight monsters and loot treasure. The
But that's a
difficulty
game where it wasn't really like anyone was feeding that hard.
satisfaction comes from fully exploring it for
I mean,
treasure.
supports are supposed to have a lot of deaths.
Not suggesting we go full on Hyrule Castle.
But yeah,
and
it was just-
additional dungeon elements, but there could be a mix.
Our team fights were
The
fucked.
simple individual puzzles.
Like, either we catch him out with a Jaxi, or
Castle, as long as those puzzles weren't necessarily
nothing happens.
progression. You could use a simple puzzle, like moving the two metal balls in Von Boris, but use it
That
for
was
a little
rough.
secret area with treasure. Dungeons like Hyrule Castle don't necessarily need puzzle depth. They just need a tough variety of monsters to fight and a ton of secret
I don't even know
areas
what this
to
thing
make the
does.
dungeon worth exploring.
Thanks for
This
watching.
is definitely